All right, I gotta get back to this right now. Okay. Um,
It's hard to separate what is true and
here
what
you go.
isn't because a lot of the records of this event have been rewritten so many times. It's also a different language, so many of the details are lost in translation.
Right.
Normally, I give you guys exact dates and details about the subject of the story, but for this one, it's just kind of general details about the person.
Right.
Paul was a Swiss Austrian teacher. He specializes as a language instructor of German and French. He always had dreams of being a teacher, and that's just what he did. Paul was madly in love with a woman named Anna, who unfortunately married someone else who was a very rich man. Folks say that once she got married, he sank deep into depression, which in turn affected his health. Anna died of illness soon after she was married. That is incredibly sad. From everything I gather, Paul never married, nor did he have any children. It seems like his mother was his closest friend. Paul was so deeply depressed that he started contemplating suicide. He didn't attempt it, but he was comforted by the fact that the option was there if he needed an out. If at any point in time he just wanted to stop and get off, he could do that.
This is sick.
In 1919, Paul gets ill from a disease that was around at that time. The disease was called, bear with me now, encephalitis lethargica. It's more commonly known as the sleeping illness, which is what I'm going to continue to call it because I don't want to pronounce that again. In Europe, between 1916 and 1924, this was a really big thing, like an epidemic. It affected roughly 500,000 people. If you caught it, you fell asleep for long periods at a time, sometimes actual comas, and some never woke up from them. I looked up the
Bullshit.
definition, and it read that it was a disease characterized by high fever, headache, double vision, delayed physical and mental response, and lethargy. In acute cases, patients may enter a coma. I read that people can still get it today, but it's very, very, very rare. The cause of how it ever came to be is still a mystery. So, Paul starts falling asleep very often, sometimes even in the middle of tasks. He falls asleep sometimes for only a few minutes, other times it's 2 days.
It's all a
At this
dream.
point, it's considered
It's
a coma.
all a
Paul was in
dream.
a coma for 2 weeks and awakens, and his mother is there, and she's telling him how worried she was, and she's so thankful he woke up. A physician was there as well. 2 years later, Paul falls into a deep coma. This is unlike the previous one. This is a very deep coma. He is placed in the hospital where he can be observed. He is in the coma for 1 year. Paul awakens, and everyone at the hospital is stunned and can't believe he's finally woken up. He was gone for 12 months. He says how wonderful the villagers are at welcoming him back into the world again. He is amazed at their genuine happiness for him.
Right.
Paul begins asking for his mother and learns that during the time when he was in the coma, his mother passed away. He is devastated knowing that she died before ever getting to see him strong again. Now, Paul is a changed man since he's awoken from the coma, but not just because of his mother's death. Paul is acting more spiritual and enlightened. He says he wants to apologize to the Italian priest for ever doubting him, and he feels a deep guilt for his lack of faith. See, Paul is carefully guarding a secret that he is carrying with him. The secret is what he experienced while in the coma. He doesn't want to be considered a lunatic by everyone. Paul writes in his diary that he wishes his mother was here because he would tell her everything. Paul moves to Athens, Greece, and
Right.
he also learns that he contracted tuberculosis during his
Right.
stay in the hospital. Paul is only 37 years old, but he knows he only has
35.
a couple years left.
35.
He's starting to feel a lot of aches and pains. Tuberculosis is a horrible condition that is an infection in your lungs. One day, Paul's landlady knocked on his door. He opens it and he is like overjoyed. He's acting ecstatic and he is on cloud nine. He gives her a big hug and tells her he is going to document everything. He says, after all I've been through, I'm still here. He wants to get this all on paper before he passes away or falls into another coma. He says he has a bad cough and a high fever, but he was going to get all of this down. The landlady, I'm sure, is standing there like, what the hell are you talking about? Paul decides he's going to document his experience of what happened in the coma in his diary, and he couldn't be more excited. Paul says in his diary that what he is about to write seems crazy to most, but he experienced the whole thing. He
This
says,
is
do not try
true.
to tell him that it was just a dream, because there is no such thing as a year-long dream. He
Right.
lived a life during those 12 months. It just wasn't his own.
Right.
Paul writes, and these are his words, quote, my case has nothing to do with inspiration and creation. I was never blessed with such gifts, and you cannot lose what you never had. My case is about a traveler who never spoke of his adventures and has finally decided to break his silence. I have no friends. My mother is dead. I'm completely alone in this world. Whoever you are who ends up reading with my manuscripts, be my friend and feel me. Do not laugh and mock me. I've been tried and tested a great deal during my life. Everything you read, I've seen with my own eyes. I've lived it. I've touched it. I worship it. I will not return to my homeland. I made my decision. I do not need obligatory superficial relationships with the neighbors. I just want to tell my story in the most precise way possible, and I want to tell it to the end. End quote. As a side note, reading that makes me realize just how lonely Paul really was. He mentioned he lost his mother and he has no friends. This may explain why he hugged his landlady and jumped up and down with excitement. He finally had someone who he could tell his excitement to. Paul asks us in his writing to be his friend and not mock or laugh at him, so I'm going to, go into this with an open mind. But what Paul says happens while in the coma is like something out of a movie. So let's begin. Paul says he awakens and realizes he's in a hospital of some sort, but it's not really a hospital, and he's feeling hurt all over. Things are aching. He says there are bandages covering his face and the rest of his head.
Yeah.
Paul looks around, and everything is made out of crystals and gold and diamonds, at least.
Crystalline universe. Okay, crystalline structure. Whether or not, okay, listen, it's amazing to me because, Tesla had something that he could take thought. He could take a picture of your thoughts and dreams. Okay, and they have the same type of machine. That could actually record your dreams because dream time is no different than this time. Okay, so this is the extraordinary thing. But what I can tell you is this is involving CERN, and CERN. Okay, so this is half truths. Okay, half truths.
It appears to be. Lots of objects were pastel colors, almost like what you would imagine heaven to look like. This is very strange to him. Remember, he is a man from 1922, and he's not used to seeing such lavish things. He can see out of a large window and sees a beautiful countryside type place.
Now you notice it was 3096. The key to the universe 396, 369, whatever. Tesla. Okay. Anyways, you see it's 1922, so if you do the math or the gematria on it, it's 1111, okay? So, bang. You see that right there? Let's see where she's at and what she's talking about. Anyways, she's at 10:06. Okay, I'm watching this. It's at 10:06. Look at the time on my phone. 10:06 is 7, okay? And 3 plus 4 on my phone is 7. Get my point? They record things in real time. They have everything in real time. Okay? Because the past and the future don't exist.
Everything seems unreal, and he's almost not even able to describe it. On the 12th day, Paul is able to walk. He says standing up and walking made his pains go away. He believes he's fully recovered, but he has these bandages on his head that still cover his face. He also had a rotation of 2 doctors.
This is being wrapped as a mummy. Okay? I have vivid memories of it. Being wrapped in a mummy. Mummified.
That would come in and see him. He is visited by Dr. Johannes Jaeger, and the doctor tells him everything is fine. You are getting better. Just take it easy. The chief doctor is Professor Molson. He continually hears whispers from the doctors talking about him, but they are referring to him not by his name, but rather another man's name, Andreas Northam. So he's thinking to himself, who the heck is Andreas Northam, and why do they think I'm him? Paul is trying to understand what language they are speaking. He is having a lot of difficulty understanding them. Remember, he's a language instructor. He hears undertones of Scandinavia and English, and he recognizes some of the words, but he still has never heard this language. He can pick up on their language better than most and was able to understand more of what they say eventually. I guess it would be like if you or I got dropped into the year 1700 and we hear people talking.
Right.
I looked up some words that are from the 17th century, which was fun to do. A nipperkin is a small glass of liquor. The word lunacy was used, and today we call it madness. The word delirium was used to describe excitement. Now you can see what is happening with Paul. He can make out what they're saying, but it takes some work, just like it would you or I if we were dropped into the 17th century. It wouldn't be until Paul stands in front of a mirror and begins unraveling his bandages on his head that he realizes it's not him he sees. Paul is living in another man's body. The man is
Very
Andreas
true.
Northam. Paul is no longer the dying man living in Athens, Greece in 1922. He is living in the year 3906, which was like a whole other sucker punch. To put that into perspective, imagine taking a man from 1922 and dropping him in the year 2022, which is 100 years later, and it's today. Well, this is 1,984 years into the future. Paul freaked.
And this also has to do with the April Fool's joke that CERN made about Mars. Okay. If you know what I'm talking about, then you know what I'm talking about. Because there's a time travel agency, and I am a traveler, so to speak. Okay? Not the I'm not saying this stuff to boast or anything. There's a time travel agency and a secret space program that goes back to 1984. Okay? I'm just telling you.
Out, which is completely understandable. He is in such a frenzy that the nurses weren't even allowed in the room. It takes days for Paul to calm down. Paul learns Andreas was in a severe car accident. He essentially died, but was able to be revived somehow by freezing his brain. We're
Yeah.
talking 3906 here, guys. There's probably
See, I was told to me, hey, once you die, you'll see what's in your brain. What CERN does is they take knowledge and transfer take knowledge, transfer it into another brain, because we live in one big brain.
been a million medical advancements since then. So Paul realizes they must think Andreas was able to come back to life, but it was actually Paul's consciousness that arrived in Andreas' body.
Right, because they hit you with a laser that re-sparks your consciousness. Okay, it re-sparks your consciousness. The brain, it matters. That's why, like, I remember being in the Montauk Project. And this reminds me similar to my brother Al Balick's story as well.
Somehow something was messed up during this whole transmission, and that is what we end up with, like something out of a sci-fi movie. Paul is going to play along with it and not reveal that he is not Andreas. Now, Paul still remembers his mother and the woman, Anna, he was in love with, and he is having a lot of difficulty sleeping, like awake for days and weeks at a time. He's thinking about his life back in 1922, and his insomnia gets so bad that the doctors call for a small group of men to come visit him. Paul is very much in awe by this group, and so are the doctors and nurses. They are like the elders, I guess we would call them. Paul doesn't know if they are priests or kings or what they are, but they are making him feel intimidated. They are called the electors, and they are actually the spiritual leaders of this beautiful futuristic society.
Yeah, right.
Paul begins to get very emotional. He breaks down to these men and confesses everything. He says he's from the year 1921. This body is not mine. My name is Paul, not Andreas. He doesn't know how he got here. The men seem to understand everything that Paul is telling them, and they assure him he's okay. Time and consciousness are just an illusion.
Yeah.
Paul begins to think he's fallen through a time travel portal somehow.
That's true.
So Paul decides if he's here, he's going to make the best of it. He wants to learn all he can about the future and what has happened between 1922 and 3906. One of the electors teaches Paul their language. He gives Paul this device that can translate words for him. You and I have that capability on our smartphones, but to someone from 1922, where only half the population had a small amount of electricity in their homes,
Bullshit.
this is like almost impossible to comprehend.
Bullshit.
Only 4 people know the true identity of Paul, and that's the 2 electors and Paul's 2 physicians.
Right,
Paul
and
asks
me.
them not to tell anyone else for fear he'd become a scientific study or whatever. One elector tells him there's a place called the Valley of the Roses, and there his fate will be decided if he is going to have his secret shared with the whole population or not.
Share 'em.
Paul gets a visitor and is shocked to learn that this visitor is Andreas' best friend, Stefan. Well, Stefan begins to realize, this is not my friend Andreas. Who are you and what have you done with him? But Stefan is pretty chill about it. When Paul is discharged, Stefan shows him around the future. Can you imagine riding in a fast car compared to what Paul was used to if he even got to ride in a car before? This gives me like Encino Man vibes. Remember when Pauly Shore and Sean Astin have Brendan Fraser, who is a recently thawed out caveman, and they take him to high school and try to make him blend in? I need to watch Encino Man very soon.
Yeah, try being me, trying to
Paul
blend in.
discovers that he owns this house in Scandinavia, and it is gorgeous with views and every
Yeah, I
amenity.
wish.
I guess he really hit the jackpot.
I
If you're going to
wish.
be in someone else's body, at least it was this wealthy guy with lots of friends. Both are things that Paul didn't have. He and Stefan and their group of friends don't even have jobs. They just play all day on boats and sing and dance
Yeah,
and
I
travel.
wish.
It's like a never-ending vacation.
I wish.
At this point, I'm wondering if Andreas is in Paul's body and dealing with tuberculosis, poverty, and famine. If that's the case, I'm sure he's not having as good of a time. Paul is confused about how these men don't have to work. How are they able to just live like royalty?
Right.
Stefan explains that in the future, they have what you call a 2-year service.
Right.
Basically, you graduate high school at 17, and then from ages 17 to 19, you are assigned a job in the city. In that 2-year period, you make enough money for the rest of your life. I mean,
Right. Yeah, well, I'm about to be homeless, okay, so, funny, good stories, yeah. Get $1 million.